Hello. TimeScape by Gregory Benford. It is, as the cover acknowledges, winner of the 1980 Nebula Award. I think it's actually Benford actually got it for this book, but yeah. Anyway. So Anthony Burgess thought that this was science fiction at its very best. I beg to differ. I have actually DNF'd this book at page 160 with a whole heap of frustration and a lot of regrets, but a significant amount of relief. Now, the regrets are because I really wanted to like this book. Benford reviewed The Invisible Man, which I recently read. Actually did the preview, he did the foreword, and he did the afterword. And I really liked the tone of those. I was looking forward to reading more. I found out I had a book by him on my unread shelf, and I picked it up. Now, the frustration is because I really enjoyed the science theory behind this book. The concept was great. I know from the back, hey, let me tell you about the back. So, the year is 1998. The world is a growing nightmare of desperation, of uncontrollable pollution and increasing social unrest. In Cambridge, two scientists experiment with tachyons, subatomic particles that travel faster than the speed of light, and therefore, according to the theory of relativity, may move backwards in time. Their plan is to signal a warning to the previous generation. In 1962, a young Californian scientist, Gordon Bernstein, finds his experiments being spoiled by unknown interference. As he begins to suspect something near the truth, it becomes a race against time. The world is collapsing and will only be saved if Gordon can decipher the messages in time. Not quite true, but close enough. Anyway, so I knew it was going to be a timey-wimey one from the start, and I don't always like the skipping back and forth in time, but the whole concept of this book was based on the future and the past, so I thought that'd be good. I did enjoy the theory of the tachyons going back in time. With very few exceptions, I enjoyed the future world of 1998. It had a few quirks. But Benford's vision of what the 90s would be like is cute. It's much further along the environmental degradation than we now have even in 2024. And he's got some cool concepts of what would happen to the ocean and what we are seeing a little bit, but not to the extent this book suggests, with runoffs of pesticides and herbicides. We're seeing a little bit of the whole atmosphere change that comes with denuding the Amazon basin, and Benford gives certainly enough of a nod to the fact that oxygen production also comes from the ocean. A thing that a lot of people who write future science seem to forget, so I like that. I'm not a physicist, and my science and maths aren't up to physics, but the tachyon parts were really well described, and I enjoyed them a lot. However, I could not abide the 60s at all. There was a lot of the 60s, and I really didn't like it. But ultimately, it wasn't the 60s that killed this book for me, it was the 70s. So, since I read a lot, and I tend to read second-hand books from op shops and stuff, I've read a lot of 70s fiction, and 70s fiction has got, as any of us who've read much of it know, have got mainstream fiction, has got a few markers to it. Sorry. You've got this thing happening where in order to build up a character, you have to build up all around them and their family and their generation and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot more of that in this book than there is actually science fiction. And I feel that TimeScape doesn't slip so much into science fiction as it does into mainstream fiction from the 70s that has a little bit of science in there. And sorry. And that whole mainstream 70s writing is obviously a trend that I am well and truly over, because it felt so familiar to me and yet unenjoyable. It was stereotypical to the extreme. And there were a lot of those stereotypes that, having read a lot of American mainstream, felt older than they should, given the 70s isn't really that long ago. So you've got the Gordon Bernstein in 1962 is a Californian PhD. He's doing this research, and with a name like Bernstein in America, I'm sure you figured out he's Jewish. So he's a Jewish boy gone to uni, living with a shiksa girl stereotype. Wince. He's got a Yiddish Ella mama who comes and stays with him and tries to make him leave her because she isn't Jewish. Oh, God help me. I could barely bear that one. Then we've got Gordon's supervisor, who is the traditional academic asshole who wants to suppress knowledge and doesn't want to encourage anyone who is doing anything out of his provinces. Now, I'm not saying that power hunger in academia isn't true. I know it is. There's nothing inherently impossible or even unlikely about that character. It may even be a character that Benford is familiar with. It certainly ticked a few boxes of past history that rang bells for me, but I wasn't enjoying reading about it. So then we skip forward to the 90s, and I quite liked a few of the things. He's got this really cool idea that the parents and the children, this is just so 70s. So, and a typical outing with the dad and his son is a school initiative where all the parents and children go down into the sewers to collect mercury, which they then sell to raise funds for the school. It's 2024. Can you imagine anywhere in the developed world willingly sending preteen children down in sewers, let alone to touch mercury? It was wonderful. I actually really loved that concept. And the way they describe the future, most of the universities are shutting down. There's a lot of squatters everywhere. Where they're coming from, we're not quite sure. But it was good at setting the scene. But setting up the main character back then, whose name I've thoroughly forgotten, was very 70s. He's at uni, he's a professor, he's studying tachyons. His wife's a little wifey at home with the kids. The kids are just kids. And we have to sit through a lot of this domestic whatever and a dinner party and everything in an effort to build up all these characters. Now, I am not saying that it's badly written. I actually think that Benford did it very well. Much better than a lot of other mainstream 70s fiction writers. Because some of the characters were vivid and a lot of the situations have stuck in my head. It's just the overall reading experience wasn't great because all that mainstream didn't really reinforce the science. So for me, it felt like slogging through 10 to 15 pages of mainstream and then getting a few paragraphs about tachyons. And really, the tachyons were great, but I really didn't care about the wifey at all. Oh yes, and there's this government back in 1998 with such a cute future he envisioned, really. There's this government man who's going to provide funding, or maybe he won't, for the Tachyon project to warn the past. And he's a mystifying character. I can only assume that Benford is setting him up to be the unlikable character, that something horrible happens to him, maybe from some sort of grandfather paradox, or something else that happened in the past. I don't care enough to read for it, though. He's described as so boring. He is like cold mashed pumpkin, boring, and yet he's this super stud James Bond who every girl that he winks at falls into bed with him. Thank God we didn't have to go graphic on that one. Yeah, no, that was the 70s guy who has sex with any woman just because that was cringeworthy, as cringeworthy as some of the other stereotypes. Okay, some of the things that I really did enjoy about it were on page 50. I had a moment of pure amusement when one of the dinner party guests in 1998 comments that the king's coronation is coming up in a few months and says how it will be strange to have a king after having had a queen one's whole life. Hello, yes it is. But Benford did the queen an injustice. She lasted 25 years more than he expected, and she never abdicated. As she promised, she'd serve to the last, and she did. So that was kind of amusing. Now, I've been reading this book for a while, So like I said, the tachyon part was super interesting and I was enjoying it, but there was so little of it, and I just felt my brain flatlining whenever I had to read about mashed potato, government guy, or slipping back into the 60s to watch some random dude have a fight with his girlfriend over snogging an ex-boyfriend on their couch. It's like, I'm sorry, but I really didn't care. I didn't care at all. There was an interesting thing. Benford foresaw continuing Asian wars. So this boyfriend that comes back with PTSD, not that we knew that it was PTSD back in the 70s when this was written, he's been in a war, I think it's in Sri Lanka, the equivalent of the 90s to now, I guess, would be Afghanistan. Anyway, horrible things. He's PTSD, he's drinking cheap wine. Gordon gets jealous. I get bored. And not for the first time, I put this book down. Now, by page 50, I had already put this book down and read another one in the intervening time. Actually, I think I've read 3 other books while trying to slog my way through this one. Page 60, I think, has got to be the end of it. Because on page 38, we had Gordon who just had an uncomfortable meeting with his unlikable supervisor. He's in this lecture and he's trying to concentrate on the colloquium lecture, and I tried to, but I couldn't. My brain had been so numbed by the stereotypical "my supervisor does not believe me, what shall I do?" that I couldn't care about the science anymore. And since the science was the only thing that I really liked about this, it seemed time to skim read for a while. 160, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, Benford. It's not you, it's just the 70s. I think I will try out the Benfords cautiously if they come my way, because he himself was a scientist. If this was published in 1980, or was it 1979, then he would have been writing it for a while, I'm guessing, being as how he was an actual functioning scientist, and that's why the science is so good. The science is great. It does feel to me a little bit as if either Benford or his publisher insisted, oh no, in order to reach modern audiences, we have to do all these mainstreamy fiction things. And they're the ones I didn't much like. So, 160 pages of TimeScape. If you loved it and you think I should keep reading, I might. Convince me, by all means. But if you like Benford and think this isn't his best work, give me some recommendations to look out for. Thank you for listening. Oh, I will say, as a footnote, I know many people feel that they shouldn't review books that have DNF'd. So if you if you do not finish a book, then you're not in a position to review it. I feel exactly the opposite. The do not finish books are the ones that I am less likely to remember. The whole point of reviewing, for me, is that I shall remember. I don't want to come across this book, probably in another cover, in 2 years and go, this looks really interesting, because I can't remember the fact that I've already read it. A thing that happens to me a lot, because I read a lot. So I've always subscribed to the notion that reviewing the do not finish and trying to give a reasonably valued judgment about what you did like, what you didn't like, why you didn't finish, where you're coming from, that's always been my position about DNFs. I'm sticking to it. I do that on Goodreads. I've been criticised a few times for reviewing books that I DNF'd much earlier than 160 pages out of, what have we got here? 400? 410? Yeah, 412 pages. So 160 isn't even halfway. If I failed to enjoy the rest as much as I'd failed to enjoy the 160, it's a waste of my time. Sorry about that, Benford. You are twice the author that I ever will be, even if I manage to publish a book, which I never have. But yeah, this one isn't for me. Thank you for watching. Comment, etc. if you feel like it. If you don't feel like it, don't. Just read good books, because that's what keeps us all going after all.